Hi, I'm Denise, and I'm the program's chairperson, and I'm here to introduce our speaker, Brett Lyon. He's been a consultant and teacher of somatic and emotional mindfulness for over 25 years and holds doctorates in both psychology and drama. How much do you want me to say? You said keep it brief.
Whatever you want.
Okay. He has. Okay. He has led workshops on, as you have heard, on healing shame in many cities throughout the U.S. and Canada. He is certified in focusing and somatic experiencing. He's trained in EFT with Sue Johnson and Diana Fosha, and just a list of all kinds of stuff.
It's on there. It's fine.
It's fine. You can see it. He's well qualified, yes. And while Brett has presented to our group before, he's bringing us new material.
Okay. Well, let's see. I got so many different things to do here. I'm really happy to be here. I think that's the first thing. I love this group. I've been here, I think this is my 4th time. Somebody could correct, which means that I've been living out in this area for 8 years, which I didn't realize, so that's good to know. And I always enjoy coming here. You guys only have one rival, which is Montreal. They love me in Montreal. In Montreal, they speak French, you know, so. But I really do love coming out here, and how many people have actually heard me before? And I will try to say something new. Okay, great, so there are a lot who haven't. All right. Well, you're in for an experience anyway. I just wanted to start by introducing a couple of people who are here. And first, John Amadeo, who you all know, but John is a really good friend of mine, a phenomenal author and therapist. And he's written this really amazing book. But his big attention these days comes from his blogs, where what did you say? You had 150,000 hits on the blogs on Psychology Today, so that's kind of neat. And I've always envied John because I have all kinds of shame around writing. I have no shame around speaking in public. I love to speak in public, and that comes out of my childhood and the fact that I was the entertainer, you know, in my family. But the writing, I went to Yale Drama School in playwriting, and I wanted to be a writer, and that just there's so much stuff that exists around that I've never really been able to do it. So when I find someone who can just get up there and do it, and then John always says to me, how do you just get up and speak without notes, without, you know, but that's what I do. So the way that you're shamed is the way that you're shaped. And the way that, and we're talking about, you know, both shame and pride. Now there's another little secret about, you know, the shaming, which is that I do have issues around speaking, and I do have shame issues, and I solve them in a very specific way. And that is that I don't think about it ahead of time. That's why I don't rehearse, because too much shame comes up for me to rehearse, so I just go out and speak. It's kind of a solution. It's my reaction to shame, and it happens to be a pretty constructive one. It has limitations, but we're going to spend time talking about reactions to shame, because that's really what we see. We don't actually see the shame in people ordinarily, even when we think we do. What we're seeing is the reaction. So I want to introduce John, you all know. I want to introduce Gail Van Buren. You want to stand up, please? Gail is one of our first certified people in healing shame. She's absolutely. She's been bugging me about getting her on the website, which is really my job. She's very beautifully, with very healthy shaming, has made it clear that she should be on the website. And I appreciate that. And there's one more person I want to introduce, but I don't think she's here yet, but I will introduce her when she comes. So, what am I supposed to be doing today? Let's look at it. I want to make sure that, you know, I cover material that I haven't covered in here, although I don't guarantee I haven't covered it in my workshops. So those of you who've taken the workshops may have heard some of it. Oh yeah, and if I put out some literature on your seats, one of them I put out because I love the picture. It's the picture of my wife and I with lorikeets. That we're at Niagara Falls in the largest aviary on the American continent, which is in Niagara Falls, but it's privately owned, so it's not a publicized thing. If you're ever up there, go to it. It's a wonderful place. So what I want to cover in two areas today, and you'll see as I talk that my dilemma is that I go all over the place. So if I'm going way off track, let me know. But I'm going to try to cover basically two elements today in terms of shame. It's a huge topic. We now have 6 workshops on it, 6 weekend workshops on different aspects of it. And we still have more to come. Sorry about the glasses, but... Okay, so basically the title is Toxic or Healthy? And, that's a trick question, right? Which is it? Is shame toxic or healthy?
Yes.
Yes, that's the answer. Basically, it depends on how it's used and what it is. And that comes as a revelation for people. We did one workshop, it was in Minneapolis, and we forgot to really hit the fact that there can be healthy shame. And the whole workshop just got so heavy, and towards the end of it, everyone's like completely miserable, and then they start fighting with me, and I get into fights easily, and we start having these arguments going on, and then we realized that we never told them about healthy shame. And so we remembered we do that really early in the workshop, because it's important to understand that shame, like every other emotion, is a gift of God or nature or whatever. It's part of our temperament, and it's there for a good reason. There's a reason we have shame, and there's a reason we use shame. And every society uses shame to socialize. So it's not a question of whether shame is toxic or healthy. It depends on the shame. Now, I know I'm in disagreement verbally with Brene Brown around this, and she is the expert these days, but I think it's a semantic disagreement. She uses a different term. And people will use guilt, or they'll use another term to talk about what I would call healthy shame. And we're going to talk about how that works. And I was struck by the fact that this today started off with healthy shaming. What was healthy shaming in what happened today? There was a beautiful example. Do you want to illustrate it, Gail? The dinging. The dinging. You got 30 seconds, and then we're going to ding you. Now, for most people, that's... And you saw how it worked, too. And somebody, you actually stood up and said, well, I can talk longer if I want to. That was great. That's healthy shame. Okay, now, but the important thing to realize is for some people, and not in this group, but for some people you actually work with, that could be highly toxic. And they're now labeled as oppositionally defiant. And I have some of that, so I know it. You tell me what to do, yeah, right. So I get to motivate myself, making sure I don't tell myself what to do, because if I do, I'm in trouble. So there's a component. You have to understand that what's perfectly healthy shaming for one person can be toxic for another person, depending on their temperament and depending on their childhood. So we'll look more at that. And then the second thing I want to cover, and I have a really nice diagram that we're going to use, is the reactions to shame. Those are the two main areas. And then I'll take questions, and I'm open to whatever you want to hear more about. Is that everything I said here? Yes. Okay. So shame is both a primary emotion and a freeze state. And I think for me anyway, the big key to working with shame came when I did the training with Peter Levine, and I got an insight. I was reading a book, I don't even know which one, but the guy talks about shame is trauma. And when I understood the link between shame and trauma, everything got clearer to me, because shame is a way of freezing up. It's nature's way. Why do we have shame? Just anybody. Why are we given shame? What's the good news about it, or the bad news about it?
Modulate our behavior.
To modulate our behavior by, how does it work?
Keeping us from doing things that we'll regret.
It keeps us from doing things that we'll regret. And how does it do that? It freezes us up. It stops us from you guys are good. I can go home now. It freezes us up. It stops us from doing things we're going to regret. Exactly. And that's how it works. And that's what shaming is about. So that healthy societal shaming is letting people know in a good way what is acceptable and what's not, and what they're going to get in trouble for doing. So we have the gentle ding at 30 seconds, which you guys were amazing. I mean, 10 seconds. Oh, yeah. So 10 seconds, and you guys got your life stories in there. It was amazing. I was thinking what I would say if I had 10 seconds, and I think it would be, But everyone did it. Everyone socialized enough to be able to handle that. And, you can conceive of somebody who would get really, really, really upset with that. And if they got really upset with that, what would that indicate to you? This is off the cuff, so I'm assuming
Toxic shame around.
they have toxic shame. Boy, you can come up here. They have toxic shame about it. In other words, there's something that's getting triggered from the past. So when you work with couples, for instance, okay, couples bring in their shame, and then they become experts at shaming each other. And they don't even know, most of the time, they're doing it. And a lot of the shaming that goes on, the person doing it doesn't know they're doing it. And the person receiving it doesn't even know quite what it is. They just know that suddenly they're frozen. Suddenly they don't function very well. Okay. So anything else about toxic and healthy shame? Any questions about, oh yeah, I wanted to give you another illustration. Any questions first? Any place? Yes, Gil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a hard time finding someone who will do the dinging.
Yes, did you hear that? They have a hard time finding someone who'll do the dinging. Fortunately, Gail isn't afraid to shame people. That's because she's certified.
Pass that shame off.
Right.
She models for us how to use it in a way that is very appropriate.
Isn't it amazing that when somebody's, and this happens a lot, nobody wants to do it, and when it's done, it's really helpful, because what is it really? It's setting a limit or a boundary. And that's what shame is designed to do, to know where the limit is. Yeah.
You talked about the reaction of a freeze state, but isn't it all four of the survival? People can come out fighting.
But that's the next, you're getting ahead of, but I'll be right there, yeah. Yeah, I'll do it now, I'll reverse this. Ta-da, you have a sheet which is easy to read. I'm low tech, this is my tech. So, since not everybody can see it, you can look at your sheet. It's the reactions to shame, and you can cover in your mind the healthy shame part. We'll get to that later. That should have a little sticker over it. But yes, what you see people doing is reacting to shame. I think this is a useful distinction. Shame is a freeze state. It produces a freeze and a stoppage of energy, and it's about the worst feeling we can have, along with abandonment panic, which is very close. Because it's about isolation. It's about separation from society. What's the ultimate shaming? When society shames, what's the ultimate? In prison is a version of it, but banishment, exile of some kind. And actually the story I'm going to tell is about prison and healthy shaming. This actually turned out, I'm going to tell you this story anyway, but somebody blew my whole thing, because it turns out there was a fraud involved in this story. But I'm going to leave that part out. I'm just going to tell the good part. So what happened was, there was a couple of kids who got into big trouble. They were a member of a native Alaskan tribe. I think they were an Indian tribe. They might have been, they weren't Eskimo. They were a native Indian tribe. And they robbed somebody at gunpoint, something like that. And so the tribe and the federal government fought for jurisdiction. And actually, it's a little more complex than that. It was one guy who represented the tribe who turned out not to really represent the tribe, but the story ends up happily anyway, so we'll finish it. They went in court, and finally there was an agreement to give the jurisdiction to the tribe. And what would happen to these kids if the jurisdiction were given to the U.S. government? Jail. They would have gone, this healthy, redeeming quality of jail, which, And what happened instead was they were exiled to an island. They had to survive a winter on an island. They were given weapons. They were given a little bit of food. And when they came back in the spring, they were welcomed in by the tribe. Now that, to me, is an example of healthy shaming. You're punished for what you did, there's a limit set, you pay a price, and then that's it, you're done. And that pattern, and I'll give you another example, which is, take something very everyday. A toddler wanders into the street, and the mother who comes out at that point and watches the kid says, "Get back here, now!" And if the kid is shamed enough at home, he might actually freeze in the street, but if he's a healthy kid, he's going to run back, right? Is that toxic shaming or healthy shaming? We don't know yet. We don't know yet. How many of you have studied attachment theory? Okay. Attachment theory, John Bowlby was writing at the same time as the major shame theorist, who was Sylvan Tompkins. And the Tompkins work had a flurry of interest, but nobody wanted to deal with shame. Therapists didn't want to deal with shame. So it kind of faded out again. But the work was done similar times. So what's the basic equation of attachment theory, the 3 R's of attachment theory? Am I shaming all you guys? 3 R's. Relationship. Well, you may have different words, but I'm going to use the R's. Relationship, rupture, repair. You know that one, okay. Relationship, rupture, repair. So what's happened to the relationship right at that moment between the toddler and the mother, when the mother's screaming bloody murder at the toddler? There's a rupture, right? So what does whether it's healthy or toxic depend on? It depends on the repair. So the question is, what happens when the kid runs in from the street? Does he get a big whack and be told, okay, that's it, go to your room? You know, or is it some version of, you know, I'm sorry that I was really angry, you can't do that, I'm sorry I yelled at you, but it's really important to learn that, something more like that, which becomes a repair. So one produces a toxically shamed kid, and the other is a healthy setting of limits and boundaries. Yes?
Do you have any more handouts? Some of this didn't get one.
Yeah, I didn't either.
I'm sorry, that's the amount I made. If people, and you guys, yeah, thank you. If you guys could kind of share, maybe somebody could share with a friend, and I'm always impressed. I made 47, so there are over 50 people here, and thank you for that. If you didn't get one and you want one, I'm happy to get you one.
I have one. We can make
I have
copies.
an extra set.
Yeah, you want to pass them down to them?
Take an extra.
Yeah, Gail knows all this stuff already. He
I
just,
have it at home.
okay. Oh yeah, while I remember to mention it, if you'd like to be on our email list and get notices of our workshops, I just need your email. So you can either give me a card, or I have some paper up here you can write it on, if you'd like that. I always forget to say it at the end, so I'm saying it now. So where was I? The wonderful thing about not using notes. Yeah, so we're talking about repair, okay? And healthy shame. And healthy shame is the same as healthy attachment. There's a difference, though, and the difference is attachment is about, you know, connection and not being lonely, and shame is about this terrible feeling of loneliness. But yes, go ahead.
Well, it seems to me like it's the distinction, as with the Native American children, either learning humility or being humiliated.
Beautiful, beautiful. Did everyone hear that? Humility versus humiliation. That's really your distinction. Healthy shame, which we'll talk about, involves humility. When they talk about a kid being spoiled, you remember, I don't know if that's a term that's wonderful, I guess. I'm out of time, that's it, folks. One of the signs of health is humility, that you have a sense of, you know, spoiled. I was using the word spoiled. When they talk about spoiled, what do they mean? A kid is spoiled. What is that? A kid is spoiled generally by getting too much of something and not enough of something else. Okay? Overindulged, but usually, and no limits. And usually what that accompanies an underindulging. In other words, it's overindulged in some area, The most common one, I guess, in certain families is there's money lavished on the kid. The kid gets a fancy car when they're young, but they don't get any real attention. They don't get any real connection. They're not really helped with boundaries. And actually, I saw this happen. It was so upsetting to me. I had a roommate who had a dog, and the dog was pretty unmanageable, just kind of did whatever it wanted. And at some point, I was living in a house with 5 people. And at some point, my roommate went away for 2 weeks to do a film. She was in the biz. And one of the other roommates was really good with dogs. And he spent the 2 weeks training this dog. And by the end of the 2 weeks, the dog was functioning like a dog. You know, it did what you told it to. It was, you could have it around. You know, this woman came back, and she immediately forced the dog basically back to the way the dog had been before, because that's what made her comfortable. And the socialization was the dog could only be with her because no one else would put up with it. And it reminded me of my childhood. It was very upsetting. You know, I was kind of socialized that way. You know, to not have certain limits that I should have had, so that other people would have trouble with, you know, this is not conscious, obviously, but that other people would have trouble with me, and that connected me with my mother, because she would put up with it. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff that goes on, and that is really, I guess what I'm getting at here is that healthy boundaries are a product of healthy shaming. And that setting boundaries becomes extremely important, and finding ways to set them that work. Okay, so that's the basic unit about toxic and healthy that I wanted to present. And then I'm going to talk about reactions to shame, and that's this diagram. So what we, any other questions? I love to answer questions. I'm a good reactor. Anybody? Okay, so just if you think of something, it's okay. Just if something comes up, you'll just ask me. Okay, so I want to go through each of these 4 reactions. This is from a book by Donald Nathanson called Shame and Pride, which is an excellent book. And he came up with the 4 directions, the 4 categories, and then we've added, my wife and I have added the pieces that go in here. So there are 4 ways that we can react to shame or respond to shame, and those are very often confused with shame. But shame is actually a feeling in the body, oh yeah, I forgot to say this, combined with a belief. And the belief is what? What's the belief? The basic core belief of shame is, I am bad, there's something wrong with me. I think it's usually more that way. There's something wrong with me. Fundamentally wrong with me. That can't be fixed. You can add that to it. But the basic unit is there's something wrong with me. That's the belief. And that's an embodied or emotional belief. I like the term embodied belief. Because it exists pre-verbally, you actually can see shame behavior in babies and young children. And the shame posture, do people know the shame posture? It's, you know, kind of to the head goes down and to the side, kind of slumped. The chest loses. There's a whole loss of tonus, muscle tonus in the body. And because it is a physiological phenomenon, one of the reasons we can now work better with shame is because there's so much more somatic awareness in therapy. There's so much more that people are doing with the body. And that's the piece, I think, that needed to kind of come online. Now, it's interesting. I'm going to take this off. It's trouble with the jacket is it's too cold or it's too hot. So just put this over here. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the 4 reactions to shame. And these are like directional ways we can go. The one that looks the most like shame, and this actually was pretty subtle. I had one of my students figure this one out and kind of shared it with me, and it really is when you attack yourself, it looks like you're in the shame, but actually you're reacting to the shame. Does people get that distinction? Shame is a feeling, you know, of real powerlessness, and there's a weird way in which saying I'm bad, I'm awful, I'll never be any good for anything, is a way of getting control over it. I remember for myself, I used to shame myself before someone else could do it. So it was kind of I don't know how to explain this exactly, but it's kind of like a power play in a way. And you'll see this a lot in your clients, particularly eating disorder clients have a lot of this, where I'm just so bad, there's just something wrong with me, I'm no good. And they're using the words to kind of try to get a handle on the shame, but they're not actually in the shame. So that's why it's so hard to work over here. Because you're working with the reaction to the shame. You're not working with the actual experiential of the shame itself. Does that make sense? It's a little tricky to get that. But it makes a big difference in the work that you do. So let's just look over on this side. We've got, and you have your diagram so it's easier to see. This gives me a nice video here, I can show it. So we've got the inner critic is the term that people know, and that's the more, intellectual term for it. That's the part that really, is there actively criticizing you. And then the other side to that, which I have a lot of, and it's interesting to watch, as I watch myself, I watch how I maneuver with it, how I kind of negotiate with this perfectionistic part of me and find ways. It's just about impossible for me to watch myself on video, and I go right here, I can do it this way because I'm in a kind of denial. I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just up here doing it. But when I have to watch myself, then it's right here into perfectionism. This is wrong, that's wrong. I have a really nice video. We had some professional video done, and in the video I was wearing my favorite shirt, which has this big flower pattern on it. And it looks just ghastly on video. So that was the end of that tape. I never watched it. I couldn't watch myself in this big flowered shirt. Now I wear a solid shirt. When I heard there was a video, I had my two choices of shirts. And so, anybody want to say anything about their perfectionism? Yes.
Well, for me, it's sort of like having that guidance system that takes me back and forth between bumping up against there's something wrong with me, and then I go over to the perfectionism, and then I go back to there's something wrong with me. But if I realize that it's kind of part of my guidance system, I don't shame myself about being ashamed.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So the two pieces there that are very important. One is that's healthy shame, and the other is that shame is a vortex. You shame yourself for being ashamed. And so shame is, Peter Levine talks about trauma as like going down a rabbit hole, or I use the rabbit hole, but like in Alice in Wonderland when she goes down the rabbit hole, but also he uses the term vortex, like in the ocean there's a vortex that'll bring a ship down. Shame is like that. Once you get it, then there's a tendency to shame yourself for it. And shame binds with other emotions. This is very important. Shame is a unique emotion in that it doesn't exist that much all by itself. Because it's a freezing emotion, it's an emotion of stoppage. It's there to stop other emotions, especially anger. So your affect, it's designed to lower your affect and to lower your anger. If you're mistreated as a kid, there's a normal, healthy, angry reaction that starts to happen. If there's no room for that anger, at the same time, and it's primary, it's not secondary, shame comes up to control the anger so that you don't say or do something that you're going to get in big trouble for. So that it's actually, Sylvan Tompkins calls it a binding emotion. It binds with the anger. It binds with other emotions. Now, the most difficult bind is a shame-fear bind. And that's what, when people, and it's interesting how it's avoided, what's the term that's used for stage fright? What's the psychological term? Or what's the psychological term for being shy? Let's do that one. That's the new one. You have what? Social anxiety, right? What the hell is social anxiety? Social anxiety, okay, anxiety, that's a form of fear. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? You're afraid of humiliation of some kind. You're afraid people are going to reject you. You're afraid people are going to laugh at you. That's the big one in performance anxiety. The solution that I taught public speaking for many years. The solution to that is, what's the classic solution to being worried about the audience? You see the audience naked, you see the audience in their underwear, you try to level the playing field, right? But that's based on fear of shame. When you say social anxiety or performance anxiety, you're leaving out half. How can you really get the work done if all you're going to focus on is the anxiety or the fear when you're leaving out the shame? And that particular bind, shame and fear, really, really escalates. As opposed to the other emotions where shame kind of reduces it, shame and fear produces like a ping pong thing, where you go into shame and you go into the fear and you go into the shame, and it's really, really hard to extricate yourself. So that's a key piece where shame is not properly dealt with, it's not properly examined, and the bias in therapy is towards fear. This started with Sigmund Freud, who had a tremendous amount of shame that he didn't want to deal with. And also think about how did Freud's social circle work? How did Freud's group work? What happened if you disagreed with the master? You were exiled. You were shamed. You were out. I mean, he utilized shame and that bias for some reason. So when John Bradshaw came along and he took, the shame work was done in the 60s by a group called the Shame Nicks. They were all Jewish. Tell me what that means. Yeah, who would have thought? Yeah. And John Bradshaw drew from particularly Gershon Kaufman, and he brought it to the recovery community, and that became really important in the recovery community. In the psychological community, it just died. And Donald Nathanson, the two disciples of Tompkins were Gershon Kaufman and Donald Nathanson. They both have the best books on shame, still. Even though they were written in the 80s, they still have the best books. He tells a story of he did the first and last and only international conference on shame back in the 60s. And after the conference, one of his friends came up to him and said, "That was a really good conference. I hope you never do another one." And he said, "Why?" "Because your reputation will be ruined." Nobody in the psychological community wanted to deal with shame. And I think there's an important reason for that, and that reason is called therapist shame. And what is therapist shame? It manifests in a very specific way. What do we go into shame about? Yeah, I'm a bad therapist. I can't help this person. So look, when you get someone comes into your office in shame, and there are a lot of people, okay? And therefore, if they're in shame, they're going to have trouble moving, right? So what happens when you can't detach yourself sufficiently? When you can't set a good enough boundary between you and them?
You're taking more responsibility for the work than is appropriate. You're not allowing for that space for them to control.
Right. And you're starting to go into shame. Because it's my fault that they're not getting better. It must, and that's how shame works. Something's wrong, it must be my fault. Those of us in the field, I think, all have a predilection to do that. I think people go kind of two ways. Something's wrong, it's my fault, versus something's wrong, it's your fault. And I think those of us who do the something's wrong, it's my fault, tend to go into the helping professions. And so we get caught up in that kind of shame. But what that shame, to tie me back, and you see how I tie back eventually, is to perfectionism. What are we really ashamed of as therapists when we don't get it right? What are we really saying when we're saying there's something wrong with me? I'm not perfect. So that's the cure. It's like, so I'm not perfect, so sue me. If you can get that across to yourself and your clients, it's just a huge piece. I do a lot of, you blew it. Yeah, you blew it. So? Yeah.
More like we're trying to be perfect in an imperfect world.
Yeah. Life isn't perfect. So intrinsically, we're going to get into shame really quickly. And again, if we go into healthy shame, it leads to humility. Yeah, I can't do everything.
And we can do the repair work so that there's actually the attachment and therapeutic relationship with the maintained in a healthy way.
Right. Our job is to, what's that?
It sees itself in that way.
Yeah, the loop, whichever the loop is, it just increases. So if there's a shame loop, you keep going down the rabbit hole. If there's an attachment loop, it keeps getting better. But part of that attachment loop is well, there are a couple of pieces I want to talk about. I'm kind of going all over the place, but I'll get back to the diagram. The part of the attachment loop that you need is recognizing the basic intrinsic nature, shaming nature of therapy in our society. And what is that? What's the basic shaming in therapy? I'm going to an expert. There's something wrong with me. I get there and spill my guts. They sit there and go, You know, so my understanding from the beginning, even before I knew about, well, I came into this field in an odd way, and I'm not a licensed therapist. I come into it through theater, I come into it through body stuff, and I've kind of found my niche. In a way, it's helped me out because I never had to go to therapy school, you know. But what I found is that there's an so I found myself, I'm not comfortable in a situation where someone's just doing all the talking. You can see that. So I found a need to, my first clients that I worked with, a friend of mine was sending me very narcissistic young men who were kind of thought they were the center of the world and were having women trouble. No question about it. And so it's like I wasn't in the room. You know, they would just talk, and I would just sit there, and I realized I couldn't stand it. You know, I needed them to know I was in the room, and I've come to terms with that in attachment theory because, you know, part of attachment, Dana Fosha defines it as you know that you exist in the mind and heart of another person. And you can't exist in the mind and heart of you exist in the mind and heart of another person if you don't know there's another person in the room with you. So that was my rationale. And so, but the thing that works about that's counter-shaming is that they're not the only person saying anything about themselves. And I do want to tell you a story about that, and this is one of my favorites. It's a story about a therapist. I read it in the therapy, when it used to be called Family Therapy Networker, way back when. They had this terrific issue on dual relationships. It was the best issue, I think, one of the best they ever had. And this was one story from that issue. These were therapists working in small towns. So they had, you know, connections with their clients outside of just the therapy. So this woman is working in a small town, and she's in a big box store where everybody goes. It's the only big box store. And her daughter's really acting out. She's grabbed some candy. She's not supposed to. She won't put it back. They have this kind of running commentary. Finally, they get to the checkout counter, and the daughter is still at her, and the therapist loses it. And she's screaming at the daughter, I'm taking it all back, and she's grabbing the candy, and she's screaming. And she notices out of the corner of her eye, you know, she's going to, yeah, there's a client there watching this, you know, with her mouth open. So she leaves she grabs the kid, she leaves the stuff, she walks out, and she's supposed to see this client in 2 days, you know. And she's like, well, should I call and apologize? Now that'll make it worse. And she's, you know, agonizing and agonizing. Finally, the 2 days go by. The client shows up. She's a nervous wreck. The client walks in with this huge smile. And she figures she's got to say something. She says, you know, I saw you the other day at the big box store. Yeah, I know you did, you know, and saying it. But this woman's got this huge smile. And she, the therapist comes out of her place and notices, what was that like for you? And the woman says, that was wonderful. If you can't raise your kid, why should I be expected to? That was probably the best piece of therapy that therapist did with that client. What did she do? She said, I'm human too. Nobody's perfect. Anybody remember, what's it, Some Like It Hot, the last line in Some Like It Hot? Where he says, damn it, I'm a man. And Joey Brown says, nobody's perfect. That's the marriage scene. Anyway, I can't have children. Finally, I'm a man. So she said, nobody's perfect. And that quality of letting your clients know that you're not perfect, I think is really, really important. And when you get, there can be, I don't feel it here much, and in the last few years it's less and less, but there can be a kind of therapist, I've got to have it pretend that I have it all. It's got to be pretend, because you don't. I've got to pretend that I have it all together, all the time, especially if I'm around other therapists. You watch the chest go up and the breathing stop, and it doesn't help. It doesn't help. It's actually shaming. You're shaming yourself, and you're not connecting with your client. You're perpetuating the inequality. So there's got to be some way to allow that normality, that you're a person, I'm a person, we're doing this together. I have maybe more skill. I tell my clients sometimes, I have a lot of skill and training in this area. You have a lot more training than I do in this other area where you're really good, and I'd come to you for that. Yeah. My best one is with therapists, where I always say, if the situation was reversed, I'd come to you. I'll tell you one thing that helps me now, though, is my age. Is I can tell my therapist clients that I'm over 70, and they relax right away. They're no longer the men in competition with me. It's like, you're an old guy, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
I remember years ago in Marin, I was working with a woman who was struggling with obesity, and it was raining, storming outside, and I fell down in the mud before our session.
God.
And so it was literally, so I came in with mud on myself.
Right.
And that's how we had our session. And it absolutely changed the therapy. I mean, because she was in so much shame, and there I sat with mud on myself.
Right.
So it was really
So that's the recommendation. Did everybody hear that? Get some mud on yourself the next time. No, thank you for that. That's just, it's so accurate that, when they find out we're people, it really helps. It really helps. Okay, so let me just try to get through this thing. The other place attacking self goes into the I deserved it, they were right, I'm bad, I'm toxic, all of this, and this becomes a kind of inner churning and going around and around the same stuff. And this is one place people go. How many people have a client who spends a lot of time here? Yeah, let's see hands. How many people have a lot of clients who spend a lot of time? Yeah, right. So this is one place. And then the flip on that, and this is the more female position. I mean, it's not just women, but it's the more female position, and this is the more male position, and that's you attack others. And that's like, shame becomes like a hot potato, and you just, you can't handle it, and you just flip it to the next person. And this is as extreme as, you get criticism and blame, and finally you get rage and violence. I think someone mentioned we have a couple of people here working with domestic violence. I believe, and I'm sure it's more complex, but I would say the central element in domestic violence is shame.
Question, please.
What?
In the way that you're speaking about it, your shame and also the reaction to shame, is it that you would speak straight up with a client and highlight for them that shame is neither here nor there, like other feelings, it just is, and not to moralize it, it's actually how you've reacted to it that's presenting you a problem.
You got it. So let me just say that there's been a fear around shame, talking about shame. It's like, oh my God, the client is going to collapse if I mention shame. Have you had any of that? Because I get that all the time. Less so now, more and more, particularly I think because of Brene Brown, people are starting to bring it out. What you're talking about is normalizing shame. Shame just is, like any other emotion. That's what you're feeling. Oh, okay. I had one woman who was a therapist, did the workshop, went back, and on the Saturday night, it's a Saturday-Sunday workshop, she was visiting with her mother. And so she mentioned to her mother, I'm starting to realize that you have a lot of shame. And the mother just melted. She said, no one's ever seen it before. It's so great that you got it. Now, not everyone will react that way. But for some people, it's totally liberating to have the shame identified. And one of the things we talk about is naming shame, so that it gets out there in the open. You have to watch the person you're dealing with. Some people really, particularly if they're in this category, it can be very hard for them to deal with. And that has to be done carefully and slowly. But ultimately, yeah, if you're dealing with a violent man, at some point, I believe you got to get to the shame. If you don't get to the shame, you're not going to get anywhere. It's the attempt. Why would someone go to attacking other? This was my approach, by the way. I'm not telling my full story today, but I usually do in the workshops. But my wife and I get up and we tell the story of, early in the marriage, the ways in which she would feel punched in the stomach and I would be unaware of what had happened. And as I finally came to look at it, I realized that I wasn't even letting myself feel the shame. But she had done something that I had felt dismissed in some way. And, one of the main things in shaming, it doesn't have to be criticizing. Ignoring is about as shaming as anything can be. Because again, shame is about loneliness, it's about exile. So there were ways in which I would feel dismissed, not necessarily that it was accurate, but that's what I would feel, and I would lash out. And my wife used to say, it was like you're two people. It would be easier if you were just a bastard. But you're so good, you listen so well, you're so there, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're like ice. And I had to really spend a lot of time, and after years of therapy, I finally started feeling the shame, really feeling it, and I understood why I didn't want to feel it. Because I just would go right to attacking others. I actually had a therapist, and we talked about it, and he would say, I said, I just get angry. Now, fortunately, my father was a lawyer. I know how to be angry verbally. I never did anything other than verbal. But I would talk to this therapist, and I'd say, I just get angry. And he'd say, well, doesn't something happen before the anger? I said, no, anger, just right there. Not true. What was happening was the shame was first, but I could not let myself feel it. This is true for many men. And so I went right to anger. And for men who aren't in the social class and maybe aren't Jewish and don't have the two parents who went to college, it comes out in violence, physical, not just words. So this is very important. And then you can go back and forth, because what I would do is I would, attack my wife verbally. She would then pull away and withdraw, so now I'm more alone, and then I would feel terrible. I wouldn't really understand what I'd done, but I knew it was worse than it was before, So, and the same...